Lies of P Overture has been released, and also the difficulty settings, and it has gotten fans talking to say the least. And so let's go ahead and weigh in on it here. Now, as you come as no shock that I love the Souls-like games. I've beaten all the core From Software ones many times over, several of the AA games as well. Heck, if you're watching this video, you've probably seen some of my guides on how to take down some of the bosses in those games. But I love the lore, the atmosphere, the upgrade system, the enemies, and of course the difficult nature. It takes me back to my old retro gaming days of having to play a level several times over just simply to memorize it in order to finish it. And when facing a boss in a Souls-like game, I feel that same nostalgia. I take several tries to learn the mechanics, or a way to work around the mechanics anyway, to take the boss down. The glorious feeling of finally winning after hours of trying, there's just simply nothing like it. So when Lies of P Overture was announced, and they said there were going to be 3 different difficulty settings for the entire game now, I was skeptical because the difficulty is a core part of the Souls experience. However, I did take the time to go through the entire game on Butterfly's guidance, and I have to say my mind has been changed about these difficulty settings, at least to a degree, or some caveats per se, but let's go ahead and break it down here. Now, the 3 settings are going to be Butterfly's guidance, which is very easy, Awakened Puppet, which is easy, and Legendary Stalker, which is hard or standard. Now, first time going through on the launch game, you just simply have the one choice, which would become the Legendary Stalker difficulty, and I have to say, at launch, this game was very tough. I'd probably call it one of the hardest Souls-like games out there, especially for like the nameless puppet boss fight toward the end. That guy took me several hours to develop my strategy for, but through all the struggles and trying to figure these bosses out, I have to say I love the game as an overall, and it is still one of the best Souls-like games out there, probably on the same level as other From Software titles. But then the DLC launched, and like I said earlier, it came up with these 3 different difficulty settings. So naturally, for the first time going through the DLC, I did keep the Legendary Stalker setting, and it lived up to every aspect of the core game, if not exceeded it. But once I was done, I thought, I wonder how easy that lowest setting would be. So that's when I loaded up with this fresh file to start all over again. And starting out, you're going to notice the change pretty much immediately. You do the same amount of damage as the base game, which is fantastic. However, the damage the enemies give to you is scaled back dramatically, probably like 75% less if I was guessing. This is going to make a really huge difference, and you can literally blast through the entire game, every level, every boss. You're going to feel like one of those all-time great Souls pros that you see on Twitch or something. You're going to feel like you are the best player in the entire world, and I'm not going to lie, it's a fun feeling because you're basically taking down all the enemies and bosses that you struggle so much with, and you're simply destroying them the very first try, and it's a delight. It's a different kind of fun than learning the mechanics, but ultimately it is still fun, and I found myself just as sucked into the game as ever. But I have to say, as I was playing it, I do know the Souls mechanics pretty much like the back of my hand, and that was also helping to make the game the breeze that it was for me. But if a player had never gone through a Souls-like game before, and this was their very first time approaching this genre, I think this would probably just be an average gaming experience and not super crazy easy, even though it says very easy as the difficulty setting. And so it serves 2 purposes really. It's a fun blast through for veteran players, just simply to have a pretty much almost like an arcadey good time, and it's also a decent challenge for newcomers without just simply being a rollover. But ultimately, it's still fun for both camps. However, now that the game can be beaten by pretty much anybody, does this take away from what it means to be a Souls-like game? Does it still fit that criteria? Well, first off, Lies of P is a bit different from the majority of the Souls-like genre already. Lies of P has a very direct narration and plot as you go along. Yes, you can find things to dig a little bit deeper, but the core story is very clear if you simply watch the cutscenes as you go. Most Souls-like games are not like this and are much more convoluted and make you really work for the story. It's just not simply laid out there like Lies of P does. That being said, it's very clear to the developers, who are NeoWiz and Round 8 Studio, that they wanted the story to be told in pretty much the forefront for the audience to enjoy as they went. It's very much of a deliberate decision. They could have just as easily hit all the story and items, taken out all the cutscenes that explain the story, and the game still would have been excellent as an overall. However, they put more value on the story, and they did want to be forefront due to clearly loving the source material of Pinocchio to such a high degree. If you look at the acquired trophies, only 40% of the gamers finish the game after starting it. If you're the developer of the game and you truly believed in the story that you crafted, 40% was probably a bit disheartening, and therefore lowering the difficulty would finally allow for their story creation to reach a much larger audience. Basically sort of opening the floodgates for people to actually understand the dark take they took on Pinocchio and to even honor the author even more. I mean, Lies of P is very much of a story-based game, and I feel like they're just simply trying to get more people to enjoy the story itself, and also just simply speaking on just pure story here, going through on the easiest setting also allowed me to have a very streamlined plot structure to make the story flow extremely well here. Sometimes when you spend hours in a certain area or on certain bosses and you're simply struggling over and over and over, you do lose the emphasis of the story and you're far more focused on the gameplay. So even for veteran players, the story can be brought to a higher ground here by taking a little bit of an easier path for that quick blast through the game. So I think for this Souls-like that has a much more emphasis on a narrative story, lowering the difficulty is a great idea for players. But once again, I do have a caveat on that. We're going to get into that in just a second. But let's also talk about the developers and possibly a side intention of lowering the difficulty for their company in general. Now, developers of the NeoWiz and Round 8 Studio, they are a very small company in the gaming space, and despite crafting a truly legendary game here, they still don't have a lot of titles to their name, and thus income is fairly limited. Lies of P sold phenomenally well, which obviously said they were onto something right, but to keep these small companies afloat, every single sale is going to count. Therefore, seeing the success and the positive reviews that their game got, why not open it up to more players who might have avoided it due to its Souls-like nature to bring more players in and therefore sales. This would allow a company to stay afloat and create more great games in the future. And I know we like to think that companies just simply develop games because they solely love them. And yes, I do feel like NeoWiz is a huge fan of the source material and they are very passionate. However, they also have to make money to keep the business going, so lowering that difficulty is going to allow this company to stay afloat for longer and possibly create more games in this nature, which is obviously a plus for the entire gaming community. But NeoWiz and Round Studio 8 really went about this difficulty setting and implemented it in one of the best ways possible, at least in my opinion, because they published the game and let it set for more than a solid year for all the Souls-like lovers out there to purchase, play through, adore the world, the combat, the difficulty, and all the lore they created. Then after that time period had passed, they added all the difficulty options to expand to a larger audience, and I loved that this is the way they went about it. It reminded me of like when a game is exclusive to a single console for like a year or so, and then it's ported over to another console for more players to enjoy. Like Final Fantasy is always just for PlayStation for like a year or two, and then they port it to the Xbox and the PC, and then everyone can enjoy the game. They're expanding the audience, but they're rewarding the core base first with exclusivity. With Lies of P, they essentially made the game for Souls-like players only, and after all those sales were in, they opened it up for everyone else. And I really have no issue of going about it in this way, and I applaud the company for rolling it out in such a, I don't know, dedicated fashion here, or at least that's what I think they did. However, now let's talk about those few caveats that I have mentioned earlier. Now, when they did these new difficulty options, they kept all the trophy system and endings all the same from the original game, and I'm not quite a fan of that. Personally, I think there should be more rewards given to players that have chosen the extra difficulties, create a different trophy for finishing the game on each difficulty setting maybe, or lock out certain endings if the game is finished on the lower difficulties. There are 4 endings in the game already. Maybe just save one of them if you complete the game on Legendary Stalker setting. This would encourage players who just simply went through on the easiest setting to play the game again with their new skills and get the most out of the game itself. It's like in retro games when you play on the easiest setting and there's usually a different ending than the normal or hard setting. It encourages that replayability. Like I know growing up playing Contra to Alien Wars, if you beat the game on easy or normal, you don't even get to fight the final boss and you get an ending to the game, you get the credits. I mean, it's still a really fun experience, but there's always that little option behind there. If you try harder and you really develop your skills, you can get something special for that particular ending. And I really wish they would do this for Lies of P instead of just simply opening everything up for all difficulty settings. Another small issue that I have with the difficulty patch was they also did it for the freshly launched DLC Overture at the same time, which means that wasn't reserved for simply the core player base to experience first anymore. And I really like that idea of waiting a year for the difficulty patch, and I wish they kept that up for the DLC as well. Perhaps they could have done it where when players load up the Overture portion, it just simply defaults them back to the hardest setting regardless of the core game up to that point, because honestly by the time players have finished the core game on an easier setting, they're probably ready for more of a challenge on the regular DLC anyway, so I personally feel they should have left it alone, at least for the first year like I stated above, or at the very least, simply make it where some of the bosses, or the final boss, or maybe even just simply like the second stage of the final boss, wouldn't be available unless you played on that hardest setting here. So either leave the difficulty alone for the DLC for a year or so, or simply lock out certain aspects of it unless you do the hardest setting. So let's wrap it up here. Difficulty settings on Souls-like games will always be a point of contention. However, when the game is more story-based and rolled out in a way for core players to get the full difficulty experience first, I see nothing wrong with that, and I like how it brings more people into a wonderfully crafted game like this. I just want to make sure that the rewards for the hard-earned effort is still there for players who put the time and hours into the game. And so Lies of P difficulty settings, I'd say, is opening the door for what could be a great expansion to games in the future, but it's just simply not done exactly how I would want it yet. But what do I know? I'm just simply a YouTuber with an opinion here. So what do you all think? Do you think there should be more difficulty settings in Souls-like games like Lies of P? Should it be different when the story is more forefront like this game? Let me know in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check out my other videos listed up above and go out there, find a great game to play. Simply have a great rest of the day.